My name is Mark Rosenbloom. I'm at the Migration Policy Institute, which is a independent, nonpartisan think tank here in DC. Am I not on? Now I'm on. MPI has worked with a couple of demographers, Jimmy Van Hook at Penn State University and James Bachmeyer at Temple University, to develop a new methodology for analyzing census data and identifying unauthorized immigrants in the census. And we can use these data to describe, all kinds of characteristics that are in the census, like people's age and their income and their marital status and their employment. And therefore, we can also use the data to figure out who is potentially eligible for the existing DACA program, the expanded DACA program, and the DAPA program. A lot of these data are already available on our website, which is www.migrationpolicy.org. And we are just finishing up a new report that will do a very long look at these data broken down by country of origin. So looking at how many people from Mexico, from Honduras, from China, from wherever are eligible for these programs and some of their other characteristics. And that report will be up in about 2 weeks, and the data will be, it'll be a very nice sort of searchable data where you can break it down by your country. So what I'm going to talk about today is what we know about the total unauthorized population, how many people are eligible for the different deferred action programs, and then I'll say something quickly about the application rates and where people, what countries have different application rates by country of origin. And as Director Rodriguez said, about 60%, 62% of people who are already eligible for DACA have applied, which means about 38% have not applied. So there's work to be done to reach out to those people. So that's one takeaway from my presentation, is that there's a lot of work to be done to get DACA eligible people signed up. A second takeaway is that there's a lot of variation by country in terms of how many people are eligible for deferred action relative to their unauthorized population, and in terms of application rates. So we see some countries like Mexico where very high eligibility rates and very high application rates, other countries with much lower application rates and lower eligibility rates. And then I'll also talk a bit about where people live within the United States from different countries and their DACA and DAPA eligibilities. And again, keep checking back and look for that report in a couple of weeks, because it'll all be there. And I can also have conversations with you afterwards and share some data with you if you'd like. So let me just quickly walk you through 3 pictures. This is a picture of the total foreign-born population, regardless of status, in the United States. And what you can see here is that Mexico accounts for the largest share of the US foreign-born population, about 37% out of the 40 million foreign-born in the US. Asia accounts for about 28%. Europe and Canada and Oceania, Australia and New Zealand account for 15%. The Caribbean is 9%, South America 7%, and Africa 4%. The distribution looks very different when it comes to unauthorized immigrants. So this is the unauthorized population by country of origin. Mexico and Central America account for a much larger share of the unauthorized population than the total foreign-born population. Together, Mexico and Central America account for about 71% of unauthorized immigrants, compared to compared to 37% of the total foreign-born population. The largest share of the remaining unauthorized population is from Asia, about 14%. And we see sort of a further exaggeration of Mexico's importance when you look at the DACA and DAPA eligible, the population of people eligible for deferred action. So Mexicans are about 2/3 of the DACA DAPA eligible, compared to 29% of the foreign-born. Immigrants from the Western Hemisphere, so Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America, are about half of the foreign-born population, and they're about 80% of the population eligible for DACA and DAPA. So I don't know how well you guys in the back can see this. Maybe your eyes are better than mine. But here's the information in a little more detail. And what you can see here is that, you know, again, focusing initially on Mexico, not only does Mexico have the largest number of unauthorized immigrants, but they have the highest proportion of their unauthorized population that's eligible for deferred action. So that's why they are, you know, such a large share of that last pie chart I showed you. A majority of all unauthorized Mexicans in the U.S. are eligible, may be eligible for one of the deferred action programs, compared to just about 40% of most other nationalities. Between 30 and 48% of other nationalities. And the reason for that is that Mexicans have a long history of unauthorized immigration to the US, so many of them meet the time eligibility requirements. Many Mexicans have US-born families, so many of them meet DAPA's parenting, you know, parents of a US citizen or LPR requirements. And the other thing that really pushes Mexico's proportion up is that unauthorized immigration from Mexico has really declined in the last 5 or 7 years. So there's very few recent arrivals from Mexico. So all of those things push up that proportion much higher than other countries. When you look at the rest of the Western Hemisphere, other countries in the Western Hemisphere also are on the high end of DACA and DAPA eligibility. They all hover around 40%. And this is explained by the fact that most other Western Hemisphere countries also have longer histories of unauthorized immigration than Eastern Hemisphere countries. The two exceptions to that generalization are El Salvador and Honduras. And the reason that El Salvador and Honduras have low DACA and DAPA eligibility rates is that a large number of Hondurans and Salvadorans have TPS, which makes them ineligible for DACA and DAPA. So they have eligibility rates around 30%. And Haiti also, you won't see Haiti on any of my, I don't have any data for Haiti. We're having a hard time nailing down our Haiti estimates, partly because of the TPS issue for Haiti as well. So I got no data for you, I'm sorry. We're working on Haiti still. And then at the other end of the spectrum, when you look at unauthorized populations from Asia and Europe and Oceania, they have lower eligibility rates, closer to 30% because of their more recent arrivals. Director Rodriguez and also Patrick and Jan on the last panel talked about application rates. So this table describes what share of this table has, looking at just at the 2012 DACA, how many from each of these countries are potentially immediately eligible. So it's people who already have met the education requirements or are in a program and meet the age requirements and the time of arrival requirements, compared to what we know about the application rates as of the end of last calendar year, which is the most recent data that USCIS has published. What you can see is that there's sort of four different, we can divide the countries into four different groups. South Korea and India and the Philippines and Pakistan are all in this table, and they all have the lowest application rates. They're all between 19 and 27%. It's only about 1 in 4 people or less from those countries who are eligible, already eligible for DACA, have applied. Then when you look at the Dominican Republic, Colombia, Jamaica, Venezuela, and Guatemala, they're sort of in a second group, and about between 1/3 and 40% of eligible applicants from those countries have applied. Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil, between 50 and 60% have applied. And then Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, and Argentina are all at 80% or better, close to 90%. 88% or 89%, I think, for El Salvador, or 88% rather, and Argentina. So really, you know, virtually all eligible Salvadorans and Argentines and most eligible Mexicans, you know, 80% have applied. So, you know, again, a lot of variation in this table, you know, and some of it, you know, sort of falls into geographic groupings, but we can talk about, and I think, you know, one thing we are, I think, thinking about is what else accounts for those differences. With my 5 minutes left, let me show you a few maps, and I'll flip through some tables. So this is the unauthorized Mexican population in the U.S. The states are shaded. The darker states have larger unauthorized Mexican populations. The circles indicate counties with unauthorized populations, and the larger circles have larger unauthorized populations. So There's about 6.1 million unauthorized immigrants from Mexico. They are distributed across, in significant numbers, across 40 different US states, plus the District of Columbia. A majority of unauthorized Mexicans are in Texas and California, 53% in just those two states. And 80% are in the top 10 states, which are traditional immigrant destinations like, in addition to California and Texas, Illinois, Arizona, New York, and Florida, along with more recent states like Georgia, North Carolina, Washington, and Colorado. In this report that we'll release in a couple of weeks, and I have some data here with me, we also go into county level data, and I can share that with y'all. I'm not going to talk about it now, but I'll show you. These are by state, so this is the kind of data that we can make available to you. So for unauthorized Mexicans by state, how many unauthorized are there in the state? How many are eligible for DACA? How many are eligible for DAPA, potentially? And then the total deferred action eligible population, and what percent of the unauthorized in the state are potentially eligible. And so we have this for about 25 different countries at this level of detail. With countries with smaller populations, we have fewer states filled in because we need a large enough sample to be able to describe it. So this is what the map of Guatemala looks like. What you'll see as I go through these maps is obviously unauthorized populations are distributed in different ways from different countries. So Guatemala is the second largest unauthorized population in the US, about 700,000 unauthorized Guatemalans. The largest number are in California with about 200,000. But then after that, the settlement pattern is very different from Mexico's, as 10 of the top 12 states are located on the eastern seaboard. So Mexico is much more southwest and traditional states. Guatemalans are mostly on the east coast and in California. And then, I don't know if y'all can see the numbers, but so the largest number of Guatemalans are in California. The largest proportions are mainly in the West and the Midwest. And actually we see in with a lot of countries, states with more rural populations and more agricultural populations, and also sort of the mountain states with more religious populations tend to have larger families and higher DAPA eligibility rates. So we see that with Mexico, we see that with Guatemala, we see that with quite a few of the countries. Since you can't see the tables, I'll stick with the maps. This is El Salvador. So again, excluding temporary protected status, there are about 436,000 unauthorized Salvadorans in the US. They're in significant numbers in 25 states. There are 9 states with more than 10,000. Salvadorans are heavily concentrated in California and Texas, like Mexicans, but then after that, most of them are on the East Coast, like Guatemalans, and Salvadorans are especially concentrated here in the DC metro area, Maryland, Virginia, and DC. About 20% of the unauthorized Salvadoran population resides in the DC metro area, which is the highest concentration for any population group. And again, we can, even though you can't see it now, we can show you, at the state and county level, eligibility for DACA and DAPA as well. Here's the Honduran population. Hondurans have a pretty different looking distribution. The largest number of Hondurans are found in Texas and Florida, with California in third. They're the only group I've talked about so far that looks like that. And then you've also got heavy Honduran concentration on the East Coast and in Louisiana. And then I'll just show you. I'll show you maps for. I didn't bring maps for countries in South America or Asia, but I brought for South Americans in general and Asians in general. And just again to emphasize that this distribution also looks quite different from any of the ones that we've talked about. Neither California nor Texas are among the top 4 states for unauthorized South Americans. They're concentrated in New York, and Florida, and New Jersey, and then the rest of the eastern seaboard, and then California, Texas, and Illinois are significant, but much lower compared to other Latin Americans. And then with Asians. And when you talk about Asians, there's a lot of different countries in Asia, even more than in South America. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit inappropriate to generalize about Asians, but the populations. But I'm doing that anyway. Let me just point out that there are a lot of unauthorized Asians in the U.S. Coinciding with growth of the Asian immigrant population in general, the unauthorized population has increased from about 300,000 in 1990 to 500,000 in 2000 to more than 1.5 million in 2013. So it's a very significant population. It's the third largest group, after Mexicans and Central Americans. The largest number in California, 400,000 unauthorized Asian immigrants in California. And then they're also in the other traditional immigration states like New York, New Jersey, Texas, and Illinois, and the Eastern Seaboard. But none of the individual Asian countries will look exactly like this distribution. And then we're sort of out of time, but we'll take some questions. And then you can also email me or go to our website. And there's already quite a bit of data on our website. And if you shoot me an email, I'll let you know when this report comes out, or just keep checking in, and hopefully in the next 2 weeks or so.
Fast. That's good. I'll switch. Do you need help getting set up?
Probably.
Yeah, okay. I think Kathleen's here.
Oh yeah. All right, great. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Matthew Burnett. I'm the director of the Immigration Advocates Network, and we're a national network with 13 partners of about 6,500 nonprofit immigration advocates across the country. What I'm going to talk about today, whereas Mark talked about the populations, I'm going to talk about the service provider capacity. So where are nonprofits who are providing legal services to low and moderate income immigrants. So I'll just start, and then I'm going to talk a little bit. If I just talked about that, I wouldn't be able to paint a very rosy picture, unfortunately. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we think about increasing the capacity of service provision to immigrant populations, and then just a quick overview of some of the tools that we've developed. We do a lot with technology, mobile apps, websites, online document assembly, and expert systems. To empower both pro se, which is self-help, do-it-yourself, and what's called assisted pro se models of service delivery. There was a recent article in US or NBC News that suggested about 75% of those filing applications with USCIS do so by themselves without the support of an attorney or a legal service provider. We're still trying to kind of source and figure out that data and make sure it's right. But it's not a crazy thing to suggest. A lot of applications obviously are routine, things that people can do on their own, and lots of them are more complex. And I think the numbers around DACA hopefully are more promising if we're actually seeing 60% of people served in group processing workshops or direct representation. That's a great thing. So this map here just shows the total number of service locations in the country by nonprofit providers. So this is both organizations and all of their offices. We maintain a national directory of these providers, and you can find it for the public at immigrationlawhelp.org. So that's immigrationlawhelp.org. It's available in about 14 languages. Immigrationlawhelp, all one word, .org. It's available in about 13 languages, and it basically allows folks to search by zip code or their state and find nonprofit providers in their area. That same directory database is also used in a number of our apps and other resources that I'm going to share as we go forward. We update it every year, and it's the source of this data that we're using also to understand capacity. So the picture here doesn't look too bleak, right? It looks like a lot of organizations, sort of where you'd expect them in the major metropolitan areas where we find lots of immigrants. But when we actually look at capacity, that number changes significantly. So all those big dots turned into little dots for the most part. And this map is actually showing the number of representatives, either BIA accredited or attorneys at those locations. So what looked like a pretty rosy picture on the previous slide actually turns into a real problem as we think about, particularly with these new programs serving an additional several million people. It becomes a challenge to kind of think about how we're going to do that, and unfortunately there's lots of good minds at work on that. This map just shows that capacity relative to census data for Latino or Hispanic populations. So you can see, particularly in the Southwest and some parts of the Southeast, but also other areas, there are entire counties that are these red counties with the densest populations that don't have a single nonprofit service provider to help people out. When we look at the Asian population, we get a similar picture. Again, large swaths of the country that have no service provision, but it becomes even more problematic when we look at this capacity relative to folks who are actually able to provide in-language services. So you saw here, we've got more groups, and then here, when we look this next map at groups that actually could speak to their clients in language, most of the places other than the large metropolitan areas disappear. And so there's a problem with kind of two layers. One is not just physical footprint or the locations, but also the ability of the staff to actually serve multiple populations, and particularly other language groups like Asian language groups. We, as part of a coalition that's working on administrative relief, made some assumptions about, well, what would it take to actually serve folks around DAPA? And this set of assumptions isn't that important, but basically what it tells us is just to serve 1 million of this 5 million that are potentially eligible, that is the folks who are the most in need, we're talking about a potential cost of over $200 million. Now, how many folks in the room think that philanthropy is going to come up with $200 million in order to support this effort? Right? Not many. So, you know, having a meaningful infusion of resources that's actually going to meet this demand vis-a-vis direct representation or even group workshops and clinics is problematic. We can also see with naturalization numbers, this is an older, I'm not actually sure where I'm supposed to point this thing. I was just pointing at Mark.
Yeah.
That he would zap it. This is actually an older challenge, which is that we're losing ground even on naturalization applications. So this is, as Director Rodriguez suggested, a really crucial thing if we want to see policy and legislative changes to get people to be able to vote and obviously have access to other benefits of petition for relatives. So on average, about 700,000 apply for naturalization each year, and about 1 million new LPRs become eligible. And so it's another area that we're doing a lot of thinking about. So when we look at this problem, and as I said, if it were just a problem that maybe I'm just going to start nodding over. Pressing the button harder actually doesn't help you. Okay, so when we look at this problem, one of the problems is just about scale, right? So we can just serve less people if we're just focused on providing direct representation. We can serve slightly more if we're looking at how do we get different kinds of lawyers acting as lawyers, but doing something less than full representation. So a clinic or group workshop type of model where you have maybe 1 lawyer and 10 clients or even more, rather than 1 lawyer and 1 client. But where we really get to see these efficiencies and scales is when we begin to imagine, well, what would these interventions look like without having to have a lawyer or a representative work on each case. And that's both where it becomes more promising, but also sometimes controversial, right? So one of the ways to address that challenge is to think about triage, right? So in medicine, when you go to the hospital, you don't actually go in and see a surgeon. When you go to the ER, you go in and you see a nurse practitioner maybe, who's a different kind of level of accreditation, less time in school, but can do things like take your blood pressure and your temperature. We don't quite have a model set up to scale that way in legal services, although what's called BIA accreditation recognition, which is basically someone who's a non-lawyer but who's trained and working for an organization that's accredited, is a start at that model. And then obviously if there were just something someone could do on their own, which is in fact what's happening if it's true that 75% of filings with USCIS or from pro se or do-it-yourself self-help applications, then that would be another opportunity. And so this is an example of the kinds of service interventions that we might think about making. With direct services, full representation at the top, think about those handling the most complex cases, and the easier cases, providing resources and tools so that folks can handle their case themselves. I also wanted to just share with you a way of kind of thinking about that model and in terms of your communities and your constituents. And so, you know, we're not going to meaningfully change the number of attorneys. Even if we were to double it, it wouldn't be sufficient enough to meet the need and demand of DACA and DAPA. And obviously, we're not going to change the number of immigrants who need help. But one thing that we can change is the number of community navigators or actors within communities, including consulates and your networks, who can actually be a service to your constituents. And so the interesting thing also is these are the kinds of things where when we do focus groups and start thinking about these problems, these are what the centers of trust within communities. They're the churches, they're the libraries, they're the friends and family. We even found that as we did focus groups on some of our work, which is how to build technology-based tools, that a lot of the folks who have status or got some benefit couldn't identify the actual benefit, but could identify the story behind the benefit. That the fact that their brother or their aunt got some immigration benefit, and they went and sought the same or similar benefit. And so that told us a lot about how people find information. I think we would all agree from the panels that we've seen earlier today and likely throughout the day, immigration law is not a simple thing. It's one of the most complex areas of law, and it deserves some attention on how to make it more straightforward and easier to understand. So I just wanted to share a few projects that we're working on, just to give examples. One is Own the Dream at weownthedream.org. Some of you may have heard of this site, but basically it provides information about deferred action for childhood arrivals, or the DACA program, and actually has a tool where you can go on your own, and this was developed with a number of the organizations in the room, Clinic and ILRC, AILA and the American Immigration Council. And you can screen for eligibility. It's very conservative screening. If you have the most straightforward of cases, then you can actually go through this computer program and complete the application on your own. And of course, you could, if you choose, go to an attorney and have that reviewed as well. But just this application has generated about 14,000 documents. So not all of those are applications. Many of them are. Some of them are just screening outputs that say, hey, you need to talk to an attorney because your case is a little bit more complex. But kind of a way we need to start thinking about how to better serve this population of self-help or do-it-yourself users so that they have a better chance at not getting into trouble. And that's really the most important thing, is identifying those things like crimes and complex immigration history, just general eligibility that they fall outside of, so that they're not submitting an application that's not likely to be granted, or in some cases actually get them into deportation proceedings because of it's making the agencies aware of some activity like a crime. This is an example of kind of how it works. You kind of walk through this interview and you get then this instruction sheet and the actual forms generated. It's a pretty straightforward process. It's currently available just in English because of our DACA population. Typically, the younger folks are able to work through the program in English. It's also used in a number of programs across the country who are doing clinics and group workshops. So we have one program in the East Bay that is able to do 5 or 10 applicants at a time in about half an hour. So it makes their services more efficient, and that's the other model we're looking to support. Another app, this is a mobile app that we developed with AILA and American Immigration Council called PocketDACA, and it is what you'd expect it to be, a mobile app for DACA. It has a screening tool that folks can walk through. This is available in English and in Spanish to see whether they're eligible, and then a view of our national directory to find local immigration legal service providers nearby. There's also a polling feature, so we poll people on how they find out about DACA and things like that, and other resources and FAQs. And so a great resource to get into the hands of your constituents. In terms of the other area that we're focusing a lot on is naturalization, and we have a project called Citizenship Works. This is the mobile app, and it will allow you not only to understand your eligibility and do some calculations around whether or not you've been here long enough and whether or not you might be eligible for certain English or civics test waivers, but also a set of study flashcards that you can use or your nationals can use to study for the English and civics tests if they're already legal permanent residents looking to apply for citizenship. This is actually connected to that app. Citizenship Works is connected to a platform that exists now, but not quite as robust as it will be. In July, we're going to roll out a new Citizenship Works platform, which is going to help individuals to do naturalization application on their own unless they have a legal issue, which then it's going to refer them directly to providers in their area. Or a really new and innovative feature, which is we're going to have virtual attorneys available. So folks can connect just with a webcam and a microphone to an attorney anywhere in the country. And we have a great opportunity in the immigration law as federal. So any attorney can practice anywhere in the country and any client can get help anywhere in the country. And so again, this is kind of innovative blue sky thinking about how we're going to start to address this issue, but work that we're hopeful that we can empower these nonprofit providers to enable folks to do more of their application on their own, certainly the data entry. It's kind of unimaginable how much time really highly trained, specialized attorneys spend putting data into a form, but that's in fact a lot of what immigration attorneys do. And so we want to make that easier for nonprofit providers and build out a technology infrastructure they can leverage. The final resource I'm going to leave you with, and this is for you and folks who are doing advocacy in the community, this is really more intended for people who are helping immigrants rather than immigrants themselves. It's called Amigo, and basically it provides immigration basics, so on a bunch of different areas of law, citizenship, DACA, family-based immigration, know your rights, detention, things like that, so that folks within your offices can get a little bit more familiar with the types of benefits that are available, but then also a legal help finder that you can search by zip code and find local immigration legal service providers. So if you're out meeting with stakeholders or your constituents, your nationals, and you want to help them find local providers in their area, you can use that legal help finder. There's also things, news that we update daily, immigration trainings and events and polling features as well. There's these alerts at the bottom where when there's new information that either from the agencies or from advocates in the community have new resources, and then we also do push notifications so you can keep up to date on changes in the immigration law. So I think that's it for me, and maybe we'll take questions together for a few minutes.
I noticed that a lot of the information was geared toward Asian and Latin communities. Do you have information for African and French-speaking immigrant communities? Like all the tools and stuff that you've mentioned, you mentioned both English and Spanish, but for our communities it would be helpful.
Yeah, we do. So immigrationlawhelp.org is translated into 14 languages, and so anyone can go to that website, and Creole is one of the languages that it's translated into. The real challenge, and this is actually a challenge where I think consulates can help, is the overhead and costs of translation. So for some of these tools and ecosystems, we're talking about basically a small book worth of content for all the different variables and different circumstances that folks have. And while we do leverage some in-kind donation of translation services, the resources in order to maintain that information, as well as to update it when the law changes, is really a challenge. So I think insofar as you all have ideas for us about how we can do that better, we'd definitely be interested in hearing those.
Is there any training available for navigators from the Mexican embassy? And of course, the population we have would have a broad network. services. But there are places where we don't have a consulate, and we resort on community leaders and navigators. And we're always looking into webinars and training, so we can train the trainers. So that might help to our colleagues in the Asian community or other languages. You train somebody that speaks English, and then that person can reply information, very basic. So I don't know if you have some ideas of places where we can get training.
I do. So I think Patrick referred to earlier adminrelief.org, the Administrative Relief Resource Center. So that's part of a consortium called CIRI, the Committee on Immigration Reform Implementation. It's now about 22 organizations across the country who are working specifically on the challenges around implementing Obama's executive actions. As part of that, there's a core group that's working on community navigator trainings. And if you sign up for the listserv, which is if you go to adminrelief.org, it's actually a mobile responsive site, so you could go there now. There's a yellow band at the bottom that says sign up for updates, and all of those trainings, as well as trainings on the substance of immigration law, will be available for free through that resource. That resource also has probably 50 or 60 other kinds of documents. There's a section just focused in the how can I help area of the site on consulates, I believe, which is where this resource that Patrick provided is. And so that would be the sort of one-stop resource for those trainings. And when new trainings come out, we email them to that list of folks who subscribe to the adminrelief.org. There's also a community navigator training packet and section on that site with different PowerPoints and other resources for doing your own trainings for community navigators.